She had seen and been diagnosed by a recognized authority at Tufts University. She was being treated. She was still able to lead an active life as a competitive ice skater and so forth. As she went there for flu, they diagnosed her with a psychological treatment. Her parents were not allowed to remove her. That's where the medical kidnapping comes in. This went on for a long time. It was picked up by a lot of media. Mainstream media was picking this up as well. But the way they spun this situation and the way that they have spun this with you is to say, and I'm looking at the Boston paper, man convicted for hacking a hospital computer network. It makes it look like you're endangering people's lives. No, the person's life that was endangered was Justina, even if you had done this. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. We have calling us from prison, Marty Gottesfeld, and we've talked to his wife, and Marty has written many articles for InfoWars as well in the past. As the New American pointed out, he was the hacker who cared too much. He cared about a young woman, Justina Peltier, who was kidnapped by Boston Children's Hospital. He's been in prison for quite some time over charges that he hacked into their computer system. He was found guilty of that this week. I wanted to give Marty a chance to talk about this and what is ahead of, because the sentencing is not going to happen until November. But joining us now is Marty Gottesfeld. Thank you for joining us, Marty, and I'm sorry to hear about how this came out in court.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for your concern. I'm actually feeling pretty good about it. We have some very solid appellate grounds to move forward. The Speedy Trial Act was violated here quite clearly. The judges who have been involved with this, I think, is one of the more interesting aspects of this story. The magistrate judge who signed off on the search warrant for my home, her name is Magistrate Marianne D. Bowler. She actually worked at Harvard Medical School before embarking on her legal career. She was a research assistant there. Harvard Medical School oversees and is the primary affiliate, or the only teaching affiliate of Boston Children's Hospital. And Boston Children's Hospital is the largest pediatric teaching facility for Harvard Medical School.
So it looks like she has a conflict of interest here, then, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and there's many. The fact that she worked there and was a research assistant is just one. Her husband also still to this day works there and is a paid practitioner at another Harvard hospital, which was referred to in the FBI's affidavit in support of the search warrant. And that is interesting, too, because the date on the front of that affidavit, which I'm theoretically not allowed to publish, says September 30th, 2014. And yet the date on the front of the warrant, which Magistrate Bowler approved, she handwrites September 29th, the day before. So we have a mismatch of dates where it appears she approved the warrant before the FBI even applied for it. And then,
well, that's interesting because this prosecutor here that was involved in your case was Carmen Ortiz, isn't it?
She was the U.S. attorney at the outset of the case.
Okay.
She was an Obama appointee.
Yeah, and she was involved in the case of Aaron Schwartz that many people might remember. She was the one who tried to send Aaron Schwartz to jail for decades for something that was a very minor, grabbing some data off of a computer. It wasn't any kind of damage done to the computer whatsoever, but she tried to send him to jail for decades, and that was politically motivated. He was somebody who was trying to stop CISPA and had done so.
Yeah, Aaron did a lot of really important work, and he was fighting, again, for the taxpayers in this instance, where the taxpayers had actually paid for this data that he was trying to make available to the taxpayers when someone else had found a way to kind of hoard this data away from the taxpayers. And Carmen Ortiz didn't like that. And kind of the scuttlebutt around the IT water cooler is that they were really paying him back for the CISPA work and work he had done for WikiLeaks and things like that. And so they weren't really prosecuting him for the actual charges. They were prosecuting him for other political activity, which they didn't like, is at least what many people believe.
Now, what you were convicted of was getting into a computer system at the time of a fundraiser. This kind of revolves around the case of Justina Peltier. Tell people a little bit about that particular case and the alleged medical kidnapping, because this was not the first time that Boston Children's Hospital had faced allegations of medical kidnapping.
Oh, no. No, it's a pattern that has gone back at least 20 years, has been documented by a former state social services worker who this actually almost happened to 20 years before Justina was at Boston Children's Hospital. And this state social services worker, her son had the same condition that Justina had, and the hospital tried the same thing. Thankfully, in that case, she actually knew the state social services people, so they didn't end up taking her son from her, but she spoke out around the time of what was happening to Justina. So Justina has mitochondrial disease. This is a very real, very serious condition that affects how the individual cells in the body produce chemical energy from food. The mitochondria are the part of the cell that actually break down food into chemical energy. And mitochondrial disease is a set of conditions, no two cases are the same, where those mitochondria have a hard time producing the chemical energy that the body needs to run. And because it's an umbrella with many different types of mutations and genetic anomalies that can actually cause this incompatibility between this part of the cell and the rest of the body, no two cases present the same, although there are kind of trends. And so Justina had many of the common symptoms, and she had been on medication for them. She had been diagnosed with mitochondrial disease by a foremost expert. He was, at the time, the chief of metabolic genetics at the Tufts University Medical Center, which is a renowned hospital, one of the many that we have in Boston that just so happens to not be affiliated with Harvard. And she had caught the flu. And the flu is known to cause serious complications for mito patients, especially when it makes them nauseous and causes them to have a hard time eating and keeping down food, which is what had happened to Justina. So you have her body already in a compromised state where it has a hard time producing the chemical energy that it needs to run. And now she's got the flu, and she's having a harder time eating, a harder time keeping food down, and so it greatly compounds the condition. And so she was slurring her speech, and she was having some trouble walking, which is wholly different than the way she ends up. One of the very confusing points here is around her wheelchair, and I'll clarify that in a minute. But she still had feeling below her legs at this point. Like if you touched her knee, she would feel it. And her parents called Dr. Corson, the Tufts specialist who had diagnosed her, who had diagnosed her older sister with this genetic condition that often runs in families. And so it wasn't just Justina. One of her older sisters had the condition as well. And Dr. Corson wants Justina to see her gastroenterologist, a man who had worked with her before, who had operated on her before, and who had just moved from Tufts Medical Center to Boston Children's Hospital. And Dr. Corson himself had actually worked at Boston Children's Hospital for over a decade before moving to Tufts to seek greater autonomy.
Marty, I'm going to interrupt you here because we gotta go to a break, and I want you to talk about what's coming up in your particular case. But just to summarize this for people, she had seen and been diagnosed by a recognized authority at Tufts University. She was being treated. She was still able to lead an active life as a competitive ice skater and so forth. As she went there for flu, they diagnosed her with a psychological treatment. Her parents were not allowed to remove her. That's where the medical kidnapping comes in. This went on for a long time. It was picked up by a lot of media. Mainstream media was picking this up as well. But the way they spun this situation and the way that they have spun this with you is to say, and I'm looking at the Boston paper, man convicted for hacking a hospital computer network. It makes it look like you're endangering people's lives. No, the person's life that was endangered was Justina, even if you had done this. And so I guess as we look at this and you go to appeal, what is ahead for you now, and how can people help you? Because we've just got about a minute left.
Okay, so we're going to be filing an appeal up to the First Circuit on speedy trial and suppression grounds. More stuff came out about Bowler, the magistrate judge, showing that she shouldn't have stayed on this case. People can help by going to freemartyg.com, following us on social media. We always appreciate donations. I'd also like to ask the White House to take a look at this situation and the corruption at play here with the judiciary, with this hospital, with law enforcement, who didn't investigate what happened to Justina at all, didn't investigate civil rights violations when her family was put under a gag order and not allowed to talk to the press, when they weren't allowed to get a second opinion, when Corson wasn't allowed to see her. And I think those are the big things that could really help a lot.
Yeah, and when we look at this, I mean, it's the same type of thing that we see over and over again, whether it is Ross Ulbricht or whether it is the Bundys or the Hammonds or Marty Gottesfeld. We have a broken judiciary. And that's why the president needs to get involved in this. Not only just pardoning people who are victims of this, but we need to have some real systemic reform here that is not happening. We've got a bureaucracy that is out of control, ignoring the requirements for search warrants, not giving people their due process, not giving people speedy trials. It is a severely broken system, and Marty is unfortunately just the latest victim of this. Thank you for joining us, Marty. And again, Free Marty G is where you can get information about him, freemartyg.com. And I hope you learn more about Marty. Maybe you can help him. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
I'm a nasty woman.
If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance.
You know, President Trump talks about how we need to be trailblazers, how we need to be outsiders, how we need to expose the current stagnant system that's been suppressing us, wanting to make us poor so we can consolidate control and buy us up for pennies on the dollar. That really is the globalist system. And he's absolutely right. So it is an honor to be persecuted by the globalists and to be lied about and to be demonized. But it's an honor to draw them out so we can show who they are so that you take action and you take the country back politically, culturally, spiritually, financially. Another hero is Julian Assange, who's been in solitary confinement in a closet-sized room. They converted a closet with a bed and enough room for a laptop. They took that away over a year ago. No communication with the outside. It's all been one hell of a time for him, and he was very bipartisan in that he exposed Republicans, he exposed Democrats. He very judiciously released information that exposed criminal activity of the NSA, criminal activity of the CIA, illegal spying on Congress, illegal spying on Trump, illegal spying on me. But they had my home number, my old cell, my new cell, and my office line. And they had Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago private apartment number that I had. Total proof of Obama spying on Trump and yours truly a decade ago. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the real deal. And America's had freedom so long, people don't recognize real tyranny when it hits them right between the eyes. But everyone needs to go to Infowars.com. The article is right up there at the top of the page, red link. Petition to Trump, pardon Julian Assange. And we go over the fact that he engaged in regular journalistic activity and did a wonderful job being advised by top journalism professors around the world, and that he was very, very fair about what he did, and that you need to send the message that he's a hero. Now, I know they claim he's a Russian agent with no evidence and all the rest of that garbage, even though they've released stuff on Russia and Israel as well, and China. But it doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. And you wouldn't have gotten elected without Drudge. You wouldn't have gotten elected without what you've done, obviously. You can't say it's any one person, but without any of us together, it wouldn't have happened. So we need the president to pardon Julian Assange. And you said in a speech, I don't care who got her illegal server. It's illegal. It's about what she did that's wrong. Don't change the subject. Go back to that instinct, sir. But you told Assange, release it. You said release more stuff. And he's in the crosshairs. And he needs to be pardoned if he's brought back to the United States.
Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine. If you're interested in healthy thyroid, if you're interested in well-being, if you're interested in having a higher IQ, which this has been linked to, get your powerful Survival Shield X2 at InfoWarsStore.com.